Hey y'all, Nick G here. Welcome to our very first lesson. So this is lesson 1. Not going to actually do any kind of drumming or anything on the kit today. I'm actually going to show you how to set up a drum kit. So I've got my student kit here. It is set up because we were just teaching a lesson. So I'm going to tear this down and then I'm going to show you a step-by-step process that I go through whenever I am setting this bad boy back up. Okay, I'm going to use the small one because, you know, my big one is, well, it's big. It's got a lot of microphones and stuff on it, and it's a lot more work than what I want to do right now. So small one. All right, so stay tuned. First thing I do when I get to a show, or if I'm setting up the kit here, or wherever it may be, is I always go in with like the bare essentials. Is usually the stool and the rug, because I want to see kind of like where I'm going to be setting up and what kind of room I have to play with. Because, you know, we don't just sit here like this, right? We're kind of flail all over the place. So we want to have as much room as possible. The first thing I always look for is what am I limited by when I set up my drum kit, and I usually look front to back. Right, so most times when I'm at a gig or setting up for a show or whatever it may be, usually my limitation is behind me. There's either the edge of the stage right here, or most of the time there's a wall. Sometimes you get like the stage manager or someone, if you're playing theater, and they just outline a square box that you're supposed to sit in, and then you don't follow that rule and you spill out over top of the box because they gave you like 3 feet squared to sit in. It's like, no. So yeah, I look for those limitations. Now in the studio here, my limitation is how far forward I can go, right? I like to have this student drum kit butted up right against my drum kit, so that there's enough room to walk by and all around this way, okay? So right off the bat, I'm limited in front of me. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring in my bass drum. So got the bass drum in place. Obviously the rug was already here, so not worried about that, but that is kind of part of your initial setup. So bass drum is here, and I know where it goes because I pretty much just directly in front of my drum kit. But most of the time when I'm setting up and I know I'm going to be seen, or if I'm on stage, I like the bass drum to be pointing directly at the audience. Now if you're just setting up in like your bedroom or your living room or something, obviously that doesn't matter, but just a little tid for thought. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my bass pedal. Oh, all right. So now that you got the bass drum or bass pedal in here, we got to hook it up to the bass drum. So most bass pedals are the exact same on how they do this. There is a little clamp just on the front here that is adjusted by a little set screw. Now most bass pedals are pretty nice. They have this little wing nut that you can twist with your hand. I've seen some that you actually need a drum tuning key, but that's besides the point. This one is just a hand twist. So we want to line that up on either on the base, the rim of the bass drum, or in this case, because it's a small bass drum, it has this extra little clamp down here at the bottom that you hook your pedal up into. Okay, go ahead, throw that in there, make sure it's pushed all the way up. Crank that so that your bass pedal is attached to your bass drum, and then just kind of check, make sure your mallets are hitting in the center of the bass drum. Right, and if you have to adjust where your mallets sit height-wise, then go ahead and do that. But that's how you put on a bass pedal. Now I'm not going to worry about the second pedal. This is a double kick pedal after all, so I do have this extra one here. I'm going to adjust that later and put it where I want to. Okay, so the next step, which is probably one of the most important parts that I look for when I am setting up my bass drum, is putting my seat in the right spot. So in this case, I brought over my chair from my drum kit because it's so much easier to adjust. A little gas powered, it's great. Anyway, so what I'm looking for when I sit down at my drum kit and I am setting up myself in front of my bass drum is I'm just looking for the angle in my knee. Okay, now this is kind of there's a bit of preference in here. Everyone's a little bit different, but I would still say there are some guidelines that you should follow when you're doing this. And one of them is that I wouldn't go any less than a 90-degree angle in your knee. Okay, and that includes when you have your heel up. Now I always teach my students how to hit the bass drum with their heel up. I know some people do heel down. Again, kind of a preference thing, but when I have my heel up, the chair is at the lowest setting. I'm feeling a little cramped in here. I'm a little less than 90 degrees. So I need to raise my chair up, and that'll increase the angle that my knee is at. So again, super gas powered, so easy. Love this chair. Okay, so now I'm a bit above 90 degrees. Okay, I got a bit of an angle here, down there. So that's a bit more comfortable for me. If I was looking to be a little lower. Now, personally, when I like to play the drums, I actually like to have a much greater angle. So I usually sit somewhere around here. And the reason that I sit with this big angle on my knee is that I like to have kind of more of the weight of my leg over top of the pedal, so that when I'm really digging in, I get a better thud or more bass. Okay, so I like to sit a little bit farther up. So like I said, it's about preference at this point. You don't want to be too tall, right? You don't want to have like a straight leg, and you don't want to be too low where you're chewing on your knee, right? So having a good comfortable angle, again, heel up or heel down is up to you. But being able to drive your foot to the pedal and get a nice good smack out of the bass drum is kind of what you're looking for. So the next part that I set up when I'm doing my drum kit is I put my snare in place. Now, a couple things. I'm not going to show you how to use a snare stand, but basically you want to extend the legs out so that you get a nice wide bass, because like you're going to be wailing on this thing, right? You don't want it to be like tipping all over the place. So you want it to be nice and sturdy. Open up the top, put the snare in, and then tighten the brackets so that it just kind of lightly clamps the snare drum. You don't need to like absolutely grab it, because then you're gonna stop some of the vibrations that go through the snares. We want it to be nice and airy and open, right? But two big things that I look for when I set up my snare drum is the height and what kind of angle we're sitting on. The angle is a bit of a preference. I am very much a tabletop person when I play the snare drum, which means that I like it to be nice and flat. I've seen a lot of people that like it to have it angle up a bit more. Again, it's preference. I just find that when I'm hitting the snare drum, by the time I come down and I hit the drum, I have a nice straight arm, straight stick, so it makes sense to have it as a tabletop. Whereas if it's kind of angled up more, by the time you hit it with a, again, a straight arm, you're getting a weird bounce back, as opposed to this where it's just like bounce back straight up. Okay, that's my logic. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the height. Now, what I'm looking for in the height is when I hit the snare drum, I want to be able to hit a rim shot, and that's my biggest thing when I'm setting up height-wise. Is that in order to hit a rim shot, and we'll cover this in another video down the road, we'll do another lesson, is you're hitting the tip of the stick and the shaft of the stick on the drum. So the tip is hitting in the center, and the shaft is hitting on the rim. Okay, so right off the bat, I can't even touch that down because my leg right here is in the way. It's butting up against the stick. So what that means is that I need to raise the whole snare drum up. Okay, so all snare drums, or stands rather, are pretty similar. You just undo one wing nut, raise it up, tighten it back up. That's that. So now, that's actually pretty good just for kind of raising it up randomly there. Maybe a hair tall, but yeah. Overall, that's pretty good. So right now, I can touch the tip of the stick and the shaft on the rim without hitting my leg. The other thing I like to do is I like to push my snare drum forward a bit so that it's kind of hugging, almost hugging the bass drum. It's like right over top. Okay, so what that does, and what I'm looking for again, is that I'm keeping that angle in my knee that we talked about for the bass drum, and then my snare drum is also far enough out front of me that if I'm going to hit the center of the snare drum, I have a nice right angle in my arm. All right, if it's too close to me, my arm's going to be back here, or if it's too far away, I'm going to be reaching a bit, and then if I want to reach for my toms, I got to go even farther, right? So I like to have, again, a nice right angle with like a neutral shoulder, kind of down, elbow right at the side, snare drum right up front, so that when I'm playing, it's all right in front of me. I'm not cramped back. The snare drum was way back here, hitting back here. Like I've got no power in my arm. Same if it was way too far out and I'm like reaching to hit my now. Right about there. Stick, center of the drum, nice right angle in the arm. And yeah. So I brought in my hi-hat right here and I want to put it in place. So basically what I'm looking for, now keeping in mind I do have this extra pedal for the drum, which, whatever. I like to have my hi-hat pedal right about there. So it's kind of like right beside my snare drum. Now, because I raised my snare drum up, I got to raise my hi-hat up, right? I don't want this gap between my hi-hat and here. It's like, you know, what's that, 3 inches, something like that. It's quite low, right? So if I'm playing on the hi-hat here and I have my left hand on the snare drum, I don't have very much clearance in between my stick here and the snare drum. So I want to raise that up a little bit. Plus, like when you're in a studio or you have microphones on your drum kit, a lot of sound engineers will thank you if your hi-hat is actually farther away from your snare drum. It means they get less bleed of your hi-hat sound in the microphone that's on your snare drum, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and raise this guy up. Okay, so right there, that's a bit better. So right off the top, I know you can't really see the hi-hat too much in the video, so that's my bad. But the hi-hat is here, and the snare drum is here. So we've got it's about a good 7, 8 inches-ish between here and there. So there's enough room to get a microphone in, mic this up, and you won't get a ton of bleed from here. Also, you have enough room, if you're playing on the hi-hat, to get your hand in here to play your snare drum. You got a lot more clearance, so you're not gonna be clicking sticks the entire time. Okay, so that's your hi-hat. So I've got one tom on here. Where the tom is sitting, it's pretty low for me. Some people might like it, but I find that when you're setting up your toms, there's 2 things to dictate that. A, it's preference, where you want it to be, right? It has to be comfortable for you to kind of move around the kit. And B, you know, what hardware you have kind of limits how you mount your toms, right? Now I do mine a little weird. I have my middle tom is on the racking system that I have for the bass drum. And then I actually include this little guy, and you'll notice that's a different color. That's because this tom is an 8-inch tom that is from my main kits, the PDP drum kit there. So I don't like having 3 rack toms on my main kit. I only use 2. So I figured I'll take the 8-inch one that I'm not using and I'll add it to this little drum kit. So yeah, so this guy is mounted on the bass drum hardware. And then I mount this guy on an attachment that's attached to my cymbal stand that's just beside me here, okay? So before I get this guy going, I'm actually gonna fix this one up first. So a couple things when I set up my toms, I like to have a little bit of an angle. So for snare, I'm very much tabletop. But for tom, I like to have a little bit of an angle kind of facing towards me a bit. And again, this is a lot of preference, but you know, I'm just showing you how I do it so that you can maybe, you know, do your own kit and whatnot, okay? But I like having a little angle, and the reason for that is when I'm reaching out and I'm hitting, the stick is bouncing back up like this towards me. Okay, especially when you're kind of more on an arm's length. By the time you come down and you hit it, I find just the angle in general kind of helps with the rebound. I've seen a lot of people do more of a tabletop angle with their toms, so they're sitting pretty flat. The only reason I don't like that is I find that when you're going to hit them, you really have to kind of make sure that your stick is more pointing down so that you're avoiding this rim and you're hitting more of the actual skin on them. Okay, so that's a reason that I don't like doing the tabletop thing with the toms. But yeah, just a little angle towards me. And then the other thing is just overall height of where the drum is sitting. So for me, this is a little low. I like to have it just a couple inches or so, the rim sitting above the snare rim. So like I said, this was set up for my students who are all like 2 feet shorter than me. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna move this up. So again, roughly about there. Yeah. So when I'm sitting at my drum kit, I got my hi-hat, bass drum, my snare still in a good spot. I did have to bring it back a little bit just to get the tom in there, but now I've got some clearance, so I'm gonna move it back forward again. And again, my tom is a couple inches just above, so when I'm doing maybe a roll here, I can jump up to the tom, and it's right there. It's not a huge jump. I'm gonna go ahead and bring that guy in and get the other tom set up. So like I said, I've got this other tom sitting on my cymbal mount. Okay, so again, people are limited by what hardware you have. There's like thousands of ideas for hardware out there. You know, every drum company has hardware. I like Gibraltar hardware. My main kit there has a Gibraltar rack, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, so again, I gotta raise this guy up. Okay, so usually I'm very picky about my toms being the same height. So when I'm playing a show, I would raise this guy up so that the rims are the same height. But for now, again, I'm not going to go to that extent. So when I have two toms up front of me, and whether I'm playing my kit or the student kit or whatever, I usually have two toms. Sometimes if you're going to a show and you're using the house kit or someone else brought their kit, you might only have one tom, which is totally fine too. You know, you might set up a little bit differently, but when I have two toms, I like my snare drum to be right in the middle of both toms. Right? Kind of like a Mickey Mouse head. You got a circle, and then you got two other circles up on top, right? If I've only got one tom, I like them to be right in line. But when I've got two toms, I move the one off to the side a little so I can get the other one in there. And that's just so that, you know, you can play and you can go to both of them and then it's not a big deal. It's also nice having your middle tom pushed over a little bit, makes it a little bit closer to your floor tom once you get in there, so you're not doing this massive leap from like A to B over here, right? Anyway, so that is your toms, or your rack toms at least. So next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna bring in the floor tom. All right, I'll got the floor tom in here. So when I take it for transport, I just scoot the legs up so that they're sitting at as low as they can go. Kind of what it looks like when I load it out of my car. So I'm gonna go ahead and extend the legs. And usually when I do this, I just kind of get all three legs to about the same height, roughly. And then I'll adjust it from there. So one of the things I look for is, I like my floor toms to be, again, tabletop. So I like my snare nice and flat. And that's just so that when you're hitting it, it's the rebound, the angle, all that stuff, math, trigonometry, you know, calculus, really big stuff, you know, you want it to be pristine. Anyway, moving on. So one of the things I look for when I do my floor toms is I actually like my floor tom to be the exact same height as my snare drum. My floor tom is here, my snare drum is here. I got a gap about yay big. 4, 5 inches, or metric up here. That's about 10 centimeters. So we're gonna go ahead and raise this guy up. Again, I wanna keep it fairly tabletop. So what I do is I extend one leg, kind of eyeball it, looks pretty good. Try and hold it level there while I undo the other legs, and then tighten them all up. And then there you go. So now that is my floor tom. It's pretty easy. Again, toms are a big preference thing. This is just how I like to do it, but I also like to tuck it in nice and close to my bass drum, and I'll adjust that too. As I get cymbals on here, you start running out of room, making little minor adjustments. So, but that's, yeah, roughly about there where it sits. Okay, so I got my crash cymbal here. And again, the stand is already there just because my tom is attached to it. The student drum kit is using mostly TRX cymbals. These were my go-to cymbals years ago when I was playing for a lot of metal bands and stuff, but unfortunately I kind of grew out of them and switched to Meinl, which I do prefer now. But where you mount your cymbals is, I would say, 100% preference. The only time I'm going to say it really kind of matters where you mount your cymbals is if you're a studio musician, right? If you're going to the studio, and that's one of the things that a lot of my professors at school told me is that you know, as a drummer, you should have your cymbals as far away from the rest of your drums as possible, because the microphone that's on, let's say, your tom here, is going to pick up your crash cymbal if it's really close, right? You know, and that kind of goes with the entire drum kit. That's why my main kit is kind of big and spread out, is that like I use that one when I'm in the studio or when I'm playing a big show, right? I have it set up so that I can record on it and have as little bleed as possible, whereas this one, I like to play it in some live venues and stuff. Again, this one gets mic'd up too, but I like this one to be a lot more tighter feel so that I can have the best of both worlds. I can play a little drum kit that's nice and tight and compact, or I can move to my big drum kit, which is like nice and spread out and just kind of covers a larger area. So again, preference as well as what hardware you have kind of dictates where your cymbals go. The biggest thing is just make sure that when you hit it, it's not going to hit anything else. But yeah, so right here, it's not going to hit anything. That's good. Also brought in Splash. So on our student kit, honestly, I just had the hardware and I had another cymbal. So I was like, we'll just toss a little Splash on there. The kids love it, which is surprising. So again, this is a TRX BRT. This is a little 10-inch Splash cymbal. Don't mind the sound. Sounds pretty nice. Toss it on there. Now this one, because I bumped up all the drums, the stand is a little short. Actually, you know what? You might just get away. You can move. It's not going to hit anything. Realistically, I'd probably just bump it up just because, you know. So the ride cymbal. This one here is a 22-inch ride. It's pretty standard size. You might see some 20 inches around there. I like the 20-inch for a smaller kit, but I've only got a 22-inch. Again, TRX and MDM series. This is a crash ride, so I like it when I have to play jazz. It's very washy. But the way I mount it is, if you didn't notice, I like this drum to be easy, compact, as little floor space as possible. So I actually had this little stand that I put on the tom rack here. And it's angled in and everything, so I'm gonna go ahead and put the ride on. Toss that on there like so. Okay, so right off the bat, if we can ever get this wing nut on, there we go. So if I'm sitting here, my preference is, actually that's pretty good. If anything, I would kind of maybe angle it a bit more towards me. It's kind of angling it a bit, yay, that way. But otherwise, it's not too bad. I like it to have, the sweet spot for a lot of people is like, you know, if you're facing out front and your clock, maybe about 1 o'clock, 1:30, right off beside you, right? That's kind of the sweet spot for everyone. So if you're playing here, it's not too far. Some people like it to be more around 3 o'clock, kind of, you know, where the camera is to me. But most of the time it's right there. And you'll have to do some tricky stuff about maybe raising it up and tilting it towards you so that it sits over top of your toms. Again, increasing the gap between these two drums so that it can sit kind of right there. Both are fine, but where it is right there is pretty good for me. I find that's a good angle. You know, again, it's mostly preference and feel for cymbals, I find. So, you know, having a nice comfortable feel in your arm so that you can play both the shoulder of the cymbal, or you can go up to the bell. You want to be able to reach both. Mostly preference at that point. But again, you want to be able to do with a ride, like little tings on it. Don't want to play too loud and blow out your ears. Ride, or, you know, sometimes you want to be able to dig in with the shaft of the stick around the edge there, just like hammer into your ride, right? So being able to play all aspects of your ride is kind of where I'm going with that. So yeah, and we got one more crash and then that's it. Okay, so the big thing with the crash, I'm pretty picky about having my crash cymbals even height-wise. Now I know you can't really tell just because of where you're sitting camera-wise, but they are pretty even where they are. The only thing is that you got to watch, especially because I bumped everything up, is that where your crash just kind of pivots, you know, it's hitting my ride cymbal there. So one thing that I would adjust is I would just either move the ride cymbal down, move the crash cymbal up, just so they're not hitting each other, right? Once you get that crash really moving, once you dig into it, it's going to start taking out your ride, and then you're going to get some weird frequencies, some weird notes in there and stuff, and yeah, it's not fun, right? So, but yeah, crash just off to the side there. Again, you want to be in reach so you can play both crashes, but it's mostly about preference at that point. Alrighty, so there we go. The drum kit is set up. This is just kind of an aerial shot of what it would look like. Again, just walking through, you got your bass pedal in a good spot where you got a nice comfy angle in the knee. Snare drum is far enough away from you. I've got my two toms here. Still, one's a little lower. Didn't want to do that extra work. Kind of lazy today. Tom here, and then I've got my hi-hats, two crashes, and a ride. Also have a little cowbell because the students love that, and a splash just because why not? All right. So overall, those are the steps that I take to set up my drum kit whenever I'm going to a gig, or if I'm bringing the drum kit back from a gig, or whatever it may be. Okay. If you have any questions, post them down below in the comments. All right, we'll see you next week for another lesson. All right, see ya.